Okay. No, no, I'm just going to use. I'll just put it in my. What happens when I put it in my pocket? Does that work okay? Let me go ahead. Hello. I don't know if I'm on this side or on this side. I'm testing it for online. Or am I working now? Okay, testing. Hey White, if you hook those up, it's gonna pull your microphone. Are we on, Guy? Testing. Are we on? Hello, testing 1 2. Okay. Oh wow, we are on. I'm gonna give you a few seconds to find your assigned pew. I'm awful loud. Story of my life. Yeah, join. So that's just to make sure no one falls asleep. So first off, you can kind of see some movement in the back in the foyer. We have some kiddos who have been working over this last week. They've started coloring and drawing and maybe even painting. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at all of them back there, but I did see my daughters. They are drawing pictures of why or what they are thankful for. And they'll be doing this not only this week, but also in the coming week. And so as you find yourself meandering out towards the foyer later on, I want to encourage you to go out there and look. And I'll just throw it out there. I mean, if any one of you wants to color their own picture and put it out there, I mean, I almost think it should be like we should see if we can outdo those kids. Like, yeah, Stan is looking at me. He points at me and is like, you can do that. So I can't draw stick figures, but if you would like to add to that collection, we would love for you to. So this morning and during the worship time, the sermon, I knew it was going to be a little heavier, but I want us to talk a little bit about the idea of suffering. And I think we're somewhat familiar with the idea of suffering because you don't live on this earth for any amount of time without having to endure some form of it. And we will talk about what is the difference between suffering that happens because you're a human that lives in a fallen world, and then the type of spiritual suffering that may come in a emotional or spiritual social or even a physical form. Now, that's something we don't see that often, and that's why sometimes it seems foreign to us when we read some of the passages that we're going to look in a little bit about. Jesus not only anticipates that there will be persecution, there is an expectation that it will come, a command that be ready for this, so this is going to happen. But I want us to look and see that Jesus, in fact, was not the only one who suffered. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I want to go to, earlier today we read from 1 Corinthians 11. Now we're going to go to 2 Corinthians 11. And Paul is going to do something that he is wildly uncomfortable with. He's going to start talking about himself and some of the things that he had to go through and why he is a legitimate voice for the gospel. Because he has gone into several different places, specifically in Corinth, and he's visited with them, and he's rushed out, and all of a sudden people are coming in and they're saying, oh, Paul is not really all that. And they start kind of sliding him, and so he's going to start writing letters back saying, hey, you know what I'm saying is for the gospel, it's not for my benefit. But he's going to say this in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. It's probably something that you've heard of before, but it's quite the list. I don't know if I should say accomplishments, but different issues that he's had to go through. He says, I'm going to go ahead and start. It's actually in the middle of verse 21. He says, what anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool. I also dare to boast about. So he said, other people have boasted about their own accomplishments. Let me tell you about mine. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind talking like this. I am more. I have been worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressures of my concerns for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? So Paul has finally had enough and said, I'm tired of these guys coming around and saying, let me just tell you, I have gone through the ringer. Now, before we talk about his motive, before we talk about what really is leading him to those places. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but how many times do you have to be shipwrecked before you say, I'm not going out on water again? Like, I've had to tread water for, I think one time when I was doing some CPR training or some lifeguard training, I had to tread water for like 15 minutes, I think. He talks about being in the sea a day and a half. 36 hours of treading water. But yet he finds himself over and over and over again getting onto a ship because he has a goal in mind. But I don't want to just mention him. I also want to look at a few other folks who were contemporaries of Jesus, who are alive during Jesus' time, and some of the things that they went through when we talk about suffering. Because again, I just feel like, at least for me and the conversations that I have, suffering is a topic that we love. We love to talk about how terrible things are. And so I just want you to feel comfortable with the fact that you're not the only one who is going through suffering. Now, we don't know exactly how the apostles died based on Bible, but we also believe that truth can be found outside of the Bible itself, that we can read some things that are true even though they weren't contained in our canon. And so from this, we have some writings that give us an idea of how the way some of the apostles died. How did Peter die? This is probably the one most familiar. Does anybody know how we believe that Peter died? He was crucified upside down. And I think this is amazing because remember, early on when Jesus was still alive for the first time, Peter was like, well, I'll die for you. And then all of a sudden, the soldiers come. It's late at night. It's scary. There is the sword that comes out. And then ultimately Peter's going to run. He's going to hide. He's going to stay a safe distance away from Jesus, close enough that he can see him. Or catch a glimpse of him, but not so close that he can be indicted or be with him. Okay, and here we have, after the death of Jesus, he's ultimately going to follow the same type of road that Jesus followed, except he says, I don't want to die the way Jesus died. I don't deserve to die that way. And apparently he was crucified upside down. Andrew was believed, historians believe that he was also crucified, but he was crucified on a cross that was shaped like an X. And that was actually pretty common back then. We won't go into the different types, but he was crucified as well. Matthew was either staked or impaled to the earth by spears, and then they beheaded him. Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, he was basically flayed to death by a whip, where he was, well, it's more graphic, but I'll let you research that yourself. Thomas was stabbed with a spear, and then he ultimately died from those wounds. Philip was impaled by iron hooks in his ankles, and he was hung upside down to die. James, the son of Zebedee, was thought to be beheaded by none other than King Herod. He loved beheading people. Jude was crucified, possibly by the Magi. Is my microphone going out? If I'm standing here, I don't mind if we just use this one. If that's okay. It's going to get a little hum, but that's okay. Thank you for doing that, guy. Matthias, who was not the original 12, but he was later added, he was stoned and then beheaded. Of course, we have the Apostle John. Does anybody know how John died? Old age. He was believed to be the only one who did not die as a result of some form of persecution, although he was, exiled, and that might be a pretty terrible way to die as well. Okay, we have James the Less. He was thrown from the top of the temple, and apparently that didn't do it, so then he was then beaten to death when they got down to the bottom. Simon was crucified. Judas, of course, we know that he hung himself. James, the brother of Jesus, he was also thrown from about 100 feet, but somehow he also survived the fall. And his enemies, when they realized this, they got into a circle and they beat him to death with clubs. And then we have the Apostle Paul, who was beheaded. So I say all of that to say, I don't think we should be surprised by the fact there's suffering. And I think all of us will say, oh, of course, because we know suffering. I'm in an interesting time in my ministry here. And it's a kind of a very special time in that, you start in a ministry, and for the first few years, you're trying to getting to know people, and they're trying to figure out how long they're going to keep you around, and you're trying to figure out how long they're going to keep you around. And then I feel like I'm just in a place where I know you. And I hope I'm not to the point where I've worn out my welcome. But I definitely can look around this room, and I can see the faces of all of you, and I know you, and I feel like you know me. And I could literally stop right now, and I could talk about, I know the suffering that you've been through. Like, I know the heartache of struggling with a child or losing a child, of all the heartache that you have gone through, of having, a grandchild who's very ill, and losing your spouse. And all of you have gone through, many of you have gone through a very significant amount of suffering, very unusual, and yet here you are remaining faithful. And to me, I feel like that's a really special place to be, to have been involved in your lives long enough that I've known that, and I've witnessed how God has allowed you to show faithfulness in a difficult time. But we all go through these types of persecutions. We all face difficulty, and we face suffering. And we see this throughout the Gospels, and afterwards we hear these stories of what these people went through. And what I want us to see is why they did this. Why would they do something like this? I consider myself a very logical person. I'm very left-brained. I told you I can't draw, and that's what right-brained people do really well. They can draw. I'm very left-brained. I'm very logical. I love math. So I'm a very logical person, and I'll tell you the truth. Like, most of the Bible is not logical. Okay, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, my favorite story in the Old Testament is about a story about a guy who gets swallowed by a big fish and hangs out in there for 3 days. Like, it's hardly believable. And then we get into the New Testament. And I mean, you can hang out in the Old Testament for a lot longer. We can talk about how walls fall down and how there's this big flood that, but there's one family in the world that gets saved because God said before saws and electricity like we have today, like, I want you to build this boat that's going to be massive, and I want you to gather a bunch of animals on it, and it's going to save you. Like, all of that is just, it's highly illogical. And so you think about this, and you think about what God would do. It's not like he just sent his son like, oh, he's going to fix everything. God's plan from the very beginning was that, like, it's broken, and he is going to be broken so that the world might be fixed. He is going to be broken on the cross. Like, that is what I'm choosing for him. I've my son over there, he's about to turn 18 years old, and that's kind of a difficult time for him. And it's a very difficult time for us too, because we wrestle between the fact that it is time for him to leave, and we want him to leave, but we also don't want him to leave. But there are some days we want him to leave. There are some days we're like, you can start now. Like, just start walking. Abilene is that way, or wherever you're going to go. Just you can wherever you don't have to. I don't care where you go, just not here, right? But I just cannot imagine. I can't physically, emotionally go through giving up my son for anybody else in the way that God chose to do this. And I want us to be reminded of the fact that that's exactly what happened. That it was a decision. That God chose this. There was never a point when the angels got together and had a conference and said, things aren't looking good. It turns out that the chief priests have an upper hand, and we think that they may try to get Jesus at night, and we don't know what we're going to do now. Like, that was not a conversation that happened around God and all the angels like, oh no, this just turned bad. They said they want Barabbas instead. What are we going to do? Now, again, I don't know exactly what the angels were privy to, but I'm sure Michael and Gabriel, they had some ideas of what they wanted to do at that moment. Based on what they had done in the past, they could have come down and wrecked shop and cleaned house and said, yeah, this is Jesus, Son of God. You don't mess with him. We worship him. Don't you dare think you're going to spit on him. And yet, this is the choice that God made. And so we see this over and over again. And so what I want to do is, I want us to look here, before we go back to this whole idea of suffering, I want us to be reminded of the fact that this was something that Jesus anticipated, not only in his life, but it's also what he said that we should expect in our own life. Now, when I was a kid, there were a lot of words that we weren't allowed to say. But one of the words that we weren't allowed to say was hate. Because as mom and dad used to say, hate is a strong word. In fact, I even remember being a young child. I had my little journal, and I was so mad at my middle brother. We never got along. And I wrote in it, I hate Kevin. And that was my sin. I meant that with all of my heart. And for somehow, I don't know how it happened, but my older brother found out that I wrote that. And Randy made me go back and scratch out hate and say dislike Kevin. So hate is a really strong word, although at that time I'm pretty sure like it was merited, because he was mean and terrible, and I was an amazingly good kid and a great younger brother. And these are the words of, and this doesn't happen just once or twice. It's not like, oops, like this was a mistake, it wasn't in there. And we'll look at Matthew 10 a little bit more in detail in a minute. But it says, you will be hated by everyone because of me, words of Jesus in red. But the one who stands firm will be saved in the end. If that wasn't enough, he again is going to reiterate this in Matthew 24. He says, then you will be handed over to be persecuted, and you will be put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. Mark 13, everyone will hate you because of me, but the one who stands firm will be saved in the end. That's easy to remember because it's Mark 13:13. Lucky number 13 is where Jesus reminds them and reminds us that everyone will be hated because of me. That includes you. Blessed are you, Luke 6, when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. And then he's going to go on to say in Luke chapter 21, everyone will hate you because of me. Now, that's something that I try to dodge. There are some ways in which I think I want to carry on the cross of Christ. Like, you probably feel sitting here right now, you are carrying your cross. You chose to woke up this morning. You chose to get on your Sunday clothes, and you came down here and you feel like this is the way that I'm sacrificing. There's a lot of different ways I'd love to sacrifice. Being excluded and being insulted and being rejected and my name being considered evil, those are ways that I don't want to be persecuted. I don't want to be hated. I don't want to be left out. But not only does Jesus say this should happen, he doesn't expect that it will happen. It's almost like he encourages us to behave in such a way that it will happen. Does that sound odd to you? I mean, I'm about to let Wyatt go in a few months. Can you imagine that conversation? Wyatt, I want you to live in such a way that people are going to hate you. I want you to be excluded. I want people to say your name and count it as evil. I want you to be persecuted. That's not the conversation that I want to have. And yet this is the conversation that Jesus is going to have with his close apostles, with the disciples around him, and ultimately with all of us, is that live in such a way that you will be excluded, hated, insulted, and they're going to reject your name as evil. So what exactly does this look like? I want to read one more thing. Actually, we're going to pause for just a second, and we're going to go back to a topic that we looked at a little bit earlier. I have this book. I've talked about this before in a class back when we used to meet in the quads. This is called Fox's Book of Martyrs. And it says it's updated to the present day, but it's no longer the present day. This is actually 2001 in which this came out, but it covers a large portion of the Christian era, going back all the way to Stephen. Anybody remember Stephen? Stephen was the first martyr. This is a fun, useless fact. Martyr is a word that basically was coined by Christians. It's actually a Greek word. It comes from the words martyreso, and it actually means to witness. Okay. And so that was one of those words that's kind of was transliterated. We talked about this a few weeks ago about words that kept there's the same word, but and the meaning as well the meaning was the same, and the word never switched over. The word martyr is a word that basically was coined by Christians that said that Christians who believe that their witness, their testimony, caused them to lose their life. And so years and years and years later, there would be the Fox's Book of Martyr that was written, and it began chronicling a very, very, very small percentage of individuals who became martyrs, who became witnesses, who gave up their life. And this goes all the way back. The first story, of course, is the story of Stephen, unless you want to include Jesus as being a martyr for the gospel himself. But Stephen is really, I guess you would call him the second one. But you have all the different ones that we're familiar with reading through in the Bible. And then we go through others. William Tyndale, maybe you're familiar with him. John Wycliffe was another one. He opposed the hierarchy of a religious institution that basically was benefiting from some rules that they had made. And he spoke out against those. And as a result of that, he became a martyr. Anybody remember another really famous martyr around that time? Martin Luther. Does anybody remember what he nailed up on the door? The 95 theses, the issues that he was having with the Roman Catholic Church at the time and some of the ways that he was. There are others in here, some of which were simply their crime. One in particular was that he translated the Bible into the English language, and this infuriated the church because the church felt that only the priest should have access to the Bible, because if anybody else had access to the Bible, they could read it in the wrong way, or they wouldn't need the priest, or they might be able to determine that what was actually being shared from the pulpit was incorrect, and these ideas of things like indulgences should not happen. And as a result, they killed him, and after he died, they sat around and they stewed about it some more, and they got more mad about it. Actually, the way that he died is they took the Bibles, they put them on a stake, they threw the Bibles that he had translated into English underneath him, they set him on fire, and they burned him. Or maybe that was his son or his follower is what he did, and I apologize. I think I know who the name is, but I can't remember, so I don't want to say it wrong. But you can borrow this book and look. But anyway, after he had died, after they had killed him, they were so mad about it that they went and they found his bones, they dug them up, and they burned them again, just to make sure that everybody knew how mad they were. So, it might have been Huss. I think Huss was his follower, right? Was it? Yes. Yes. This is a fascinating book. John Firth was in that number. Tyndale, of course, was around that time, but Huss was one of the ones that he was associated with him. So that was in Scotland in the 1600s. You can read all about this. Like, I don't know anybody who's weird enough to read this besides me. Like, to actually sit down and read this. Like, it's actually terrible. I even highlighted in here, like, what was I thinking? And it goes all the way up to 2000s. This was ended in 2001 was when it was published. But here's one China in 2000. But there are some crazy stories. Even one about a woman who had multiple children, and they pulled her out and said, deny Christ or we'll kill you. She said, I'll never deny Christ. And she said, okay, that's fine. Well, we'll start with your kids. And went through all her kids and said, you deny Christ and we'll let your children live. And her children looked at her and said, don't you dare deny Jesus and take away what we're all going to get. And they all ultimately died as a result of that. And so there's been quite a few. So what I want to do now is, and what I really wanted to get through the whole time, and I apologize for taking quite this long, is I want us to realize that we will have suffering a part of this life. But what are the ways in which we choose to suffer for the glory of the gospel, for the sake of the kingdom, and for the honor of Jesus? Now, there's really not any stakes around. We're not talking about burning, crucifying, stoning, impaling. That's kind of not in our. That's not in our culture right now. I mean, it still is definitely in the culture of some places in 2020, just not in Hobbs, New Mexico. But I want us to encourage us to think about what are sacrifices that we make. And the reason why I wanted to ask that is because I know that we're all suffering right now. I think socially we're suffering. I think emotionally we're suffering. I think mentally we're suffering. But I want us to ask, how are we suffering for the sake of the gospel? And how can we make sure that we don't just think that simply because we're stuck in 2020 that there's nothing we can do for the sake of the kingdom? And I really want to be very careful about this. But I believe that there are ways that we can suffer for the cause of Christ. And some of those go back to what Jesus said in Luke chapter 6. He said they're going to hate you, they're going to exclude you, they're going to insult you, and they're going to, count your name as evil. Right? And so I'm not suggesting that that we go out and, saw up a couple of logs and make a cross out of them and drag them up and down the street. I don't think that's at all what we're trying to do here. But I think there's ways that we can suffer and allow God to be glorified through that. And I think it could happen in a way that maybe we haven't thought a whole lot about. And I'm trying to be very careful because I'm building up to where we're going to be going next week. And I don't want to get there, because if I get there, then I don't have anything to say next week. And I hope you're excited about being here next week. But it wasn't just that Jesus suffered. It was that he chose to suffer. And now I'm going to leave you hanging. I want you to think about in what manner, in what way did Jesus suffer? Not physically, but what was his reaction as he was facing suffering? For me, it's really simple. Like, if something bad happens to me, and I have to suffer in some way, like, I want people to know about this. Like, it's the reason why most kids get Band-Aids in the first place, right? When kids get Band-Aids, part of it is because they might actually need something to cover their wound. But what does a Band-Aid do? It calls attention, it tells a story, it gives an opportunity for someone to say, look what happened to me. I can't tell you how many times that I put Band-Aids on kids, and I'm like, I don't know where to put it. Like, they're like, it hurts right here. Look, Dad, right here. You could, and I'm like, I don't know, but they want, and they don't want the clear Band-Aid. Like, that is insulting to them. They want the hot pink Hello Kitty Band-Aid that says, like, I've been hurt. And I think even as adults, we put on Band-Aids ourselves. And I'm going to quote Terry Holloman on this. I love this, and she doesn't mean it. She says it tongue-in-cheek, but I love one of her quotes. She says, if there's a potluck, and I'm summarizing, I may get it wrong. She says, I don't mind going to the end of the line as long as everybody sees me go to the end of the line. Like, we don't mind suffering, but we want to be, look at me, I'm suffering. And so now I'm kind of giving it away. What we're going to talk about next week is Jesus chose to suffer, but it was never in a way that says, look at me, look at what I'm doing. He didn't. And I think one of the best ways that we can be Christians in 2020 is to choose the way in which we suffer. I think we can suffer in a way that is different and is a little weird and really brings glory to God. Everybody in this world is suffering. That's not unusual. We have people who have lost jobs. We have people who have lost family members. We have people who are ill. We have people who just, their life is falling apart. And so we can't really say, look, I'm different because I'm a Christian. I'm suffering from COVID and you're not. I lost my job and you didn't. We can't say that. But what we can do is that we can live in this suffering in such a way that is very different. There's a game I used to play. We're almost out of time. But there's a game that we used to play, and I've thought about wanting to implement that here, and I probably couldn't get away with it. But there's a game called Taboo. Has anybody ever played the game of Taboo before? Okay, taboo. A lot of you have probably played it and you didn't even know it. It's the one that has a card. You're given this card, okay, and it has a word on it, and then it has a line, and then it has 5 more words. And the object of the game is you're with another team, but you have this card. Only you can see this card. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to get everybody else or someone else on your team to say that top word, but you're not allowed to use the 5 words below it. Right? And there's a little buzzer. And this is why taboo is not allowed in our house. Because for some reason that buzzer makes the most infuriating, obnoxious sound in the world. It's like, meow. And our kids love doing it because along with the game, the person who's not on your team is staring at your card over your shoulder. And if you say any of one of the wrong words, they have that buzzer, which happens to be positioned about 3 centimeters from your ear. And they're like, bah, that's the wrong one. You go to the next one, right? But wouldn't it be great if we could play a game of spiritual taboo this week? And I just wonder what this is going to look like. I've already said some things a couple weeks ago that I don't know if that could have gotten me fired, but at least it sent me on 2 weeks of COVID restriction, right? What if we played taboo this week? What are 5 words that we won't say this week? I've got my pen. I'm going to write it down. What are 5 words that we're not going to say this week? Hate. I'm going to throw in one. It's going to make you all mad because you've lost half of what you're planning to say tomorrow morning when you go in. Governor. Can you go 7 days without saying the word governor? And this doesn't count right now because it starts after I get done because I still have to talk about this. What would happen if you got around the water cooler tomorrow morning and when everybody's complaining, and that's the nice word, when everybody's complaining and they're mad and they're saying all sorts of terrible things about the governor, what would happen if you were the one who didn't pile on? Okay, so hate. Governor. What else? Lynn, you whispered something. Oh, we're on the air, so I can't repeat that. I need to. Yeah, and don't say them in the same sentence. I think that's what he was saying there. What else? What's a word that you will commit to not saying this week? I don't want to have to give another one. Because if I give another one, it'll be one that you won't like. Liberal. Can you go all week without saying the word liberal? Or hate? Or governor? What else? I heard somebody, Michelle's giggling, so I think it must have been Mike who said something. It wasn't Mike. President. See, I'm telling you, it's a good thing that she said something because if Louise hadn't said president, I was going to say politics. That you can't say the word politics or politicians. Politicians or politics? Okay, here's my last shot. You have to speak now, Bob. Fired? Hey, that would be good for me. You think we could get that going for a few weeks?
We can use terminated instead.
Thanks, Scotty. Wow. It feels so good to be back. It really does. I'm telling you, this has been crazy for me. Not only was I exposed, but but didn't have any symptoms, and I tested negative. I didn't have, but I was at home for really almost 2 weeks, for like 10 days. Like from the test, I had to wait 10 days until the negative, and so I'm waiting around. Every day I talked to Lance Havens. Every day he called me Ferris Bueller. Every day. And if those of you who've seen that movie, that's about a kid who's in high school who skips school and like goes off and has fun. And he's like, how's it going, Ferris Bueller? He's like, how's it feel to be at home completely healthy while the rest of us are working? So I wish I could go the whole week without saying Lance. That probably might be one more good thing. So we have hate, we have governor, we have liberal, we have president. Is there one more? If we could get away without saying COVID for a whole week. Okay, nobody said number 5, so I'm going to do, and obviously if I could assign a little angel with a taboo buzzer over your shoulder that could look and listen, but obviously you don't have to do it. Do it.
Could mine be a phrase?
Okay. Sick and tired. How about that? Sick and tired. What do all of these have in common? And I want to be careful about this because we have, kind of some people who are associated with some of these words. But for the most part, when we say the word COVID or president or liberal or governor or hate or sick and tired, all of those are filled with negative connotations. We say those in a way of complaining and arguing. I had an opportunity to visit with another minister who's a father of several kids, and he picked up, he said that when his kids, he says with COVID, they're around each other all the time. It's really tough. He said they just start yapping at each other. And he said, I'm just going to say the phrase, do everything without arguing and complaining. And so they start yapping, and he starts saying, do everything without arguing and complaining. Do everything without arguing and complaining. Do everything without arguing or complaining. He said he got to a point, he says, that all it was like they wanted to talk about how terrible life was. Okay? When we go out into the world, joining the chorus of sick and tired does not set us apart. Suffering for a reason and choosing to suffer in a way that brings glory to God is what sets us apart. It's what made Jesus different. Jesus was not the only one on a cross, not even the very day he was crucified. He had one on the right and one on his left. There are stories of Romans crucifying thousands of Jews in one day. Jesus was no different than they were in the respect that he died nailed to a cross. The difference is he chose to die, and he chose to die for us, and he chose to do it in such a way that he suffered for God's glory and for your salvation and for my salvation. And so this week, we want to be followers of Christ. When you go out, you will suffer. Suffer like a Christian. Suffer like a follower. Suffer like Christ. So, we're going to close out with these 5 words. Hate, governor, liberal, president, COVID, and we get to add in the bonus phrase is sick and tired. I'm challenging you this week not to say those words. And if that means that you suffer in silence, so be it. Let this be a week where we choose to suffer in such a way that God's glorified. And the next week when we come together, we're going to talk about the way in which Jesus suffered. And he did something that was so extreme and so out of this world that it still is powerful today to see how he handled some of the people who were yelling at him and his response to them. So I do want to ask that we're going to close out in prayer. Please remember those who Scotty mentioned earlier. Please be in prayer for them. And this week, I'm going to ask you to let's be people who suffer for the Lord and do it in such a way that he can be glorified. Let's pray. God and Father, I thank you again for giving us an opportunity to be thankful, to be joyful, even in a time of suffering, a time where this whole nation, this whole world is just, they're frustrated and they're angry and we're empty. And yet this is an opportunity in which we can live and act and speak in a way that just amazes and surprises people and ultimately can bring glory to you. And so, Lord, I pray that we will take out of our mouths the negativity, that you will purify our hearts, that you will cleanse our minds, and that you will allow us to be a shining light that allows people to see you through our words and our actions. And even, Lord, through the words that we don't say this week. May you be glorified through it all. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Thank you again for being here. We look forward to seeing you here on Wednesday and then again on Sunday. You're dismissed.
There's some artwork that the kids did during Bible class out here. If you want to get a little pick-me-up, read them. It's what they were thankful for. And some of them said puppies. Some of them said chips and queso. They all said God and family. It's really good. Read this artwork.
Thank you, Brad.